Hundreds of migrant girls arrive in San Diego. The San Diego Convention Center is now sheltering some 700 teenagers who crossed the border alone to seek asylum. And the rise in anti-Asian hate. For many, it's personal and familiar. We talk with someone who has faced it all and is silent no longer. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and joining me on this remote edition of the KPBS Roundtable are KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler and Leanne Kim, former San Diego broadcast journalist and anchor. For the last year, the San Diego Convention Center had been a temporary shelter for the homeless San Diego population. They've been moved into Golden Hall, and the Convention Center is now sheltering hundreds of unaccompanied children who have crossed the border to seek asylum. KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler has been following the story and joins me on the roundtable. Welcome, Max.
Good to be here.
Max, more than 700 girls aged 13 to 17 arrived in San Diego over the last week. Can you give us an idea about the situation in the convention center? What's it like? Maybe just describe the setup for us.
Right, so this is actually a fairly similar setup to what we saw for much of the past year when it was being used to shelter homeless San Diegans. There's cots set up around the very large convention space. The major differences between what existed before, which included medical stations, food, a cafeteria, would be that, now there's educational areas, there's TVs set up with Netflix that kids can watch, there's areas for them to color in books and altogether entertain themselves. Of course, these are older kids, so coloring might not be so interesting, but write letters and generally stay entertained.
So at maximum capacity, how many children can we expect?
They're expecting around 1,450 children by the time the convention center reaches full capacity, which isn't quite yet.
So how is their support being coordinated, and how long do officials estimate that each child will spend at the center?
So one thing that's really important to keep in mind is this is being done under kind of an emergency provision. Each emergency intake center, as they're being called by the federal government, is being handled differently and really kind of paving the road here. So in San Diego, the federal government is the one coordinating everything, but it has kind of leaned on local service providers, including the SBCS, South Bay Community Services, as they were formerly called, to do case management with the young women, to work on mental health issues, and to also Rady's Children's Hospital is working with them on health issues, which we'll get to a little bit later, as there's been quite a bit. But the idea being that the kids will be spending at least 30 to 35 days on average staying at this convention center.
So you touched upon this just a little bit, but on a practical level, what kind of services are these children receiving?
The county is under an obligation to provide them with education because they are in the custody of the county. So they're in the custody of the federal government, but right now they're in the county, and it's the county's responsibility to provide education for as many kids as possible. So they're learning, they're getting some help adjusting to America. A lot of the young women arriving obviously have never been to the U.S., have maybe never spoken a word of English. Then they're also getting health checks because they've oftentimes been on a long, oftentimes miserable journey to the southern border and have just spent, sometimes 2 to 3 weeks in a very cramped Border Patrol facility.
As the children have been brought in, many have tested positive for COVID-19, and the number is growing as more tests are returned. How bad is the situation, and what is the protocol to handle this type of medical challenge among such a large group of minors?
Right, the numbers are really disturbing. Over 80 of the children have already tested positive for COVID-19, and that number is growing. And it directly stems from the crowding that the children experienced in Border Patrol stations that under COVID protocol should only be handling around 20 to 25 people, holding as many as 400, 500 people, making it really easy for COVID-19 to spread. So a lot of young girls are coming in and they already have the disease. And the idea is the convention center and the social services there need to suss out who's been exposed to COVID-19 and who should be separated from the rest of the group. And it's tough because, again, symptoms take a while to develop. Positive tests take a while to develop. It's a difficult situation. One thing that is working in the convention center's favor is you have a lot of space with which to segregate different populations, depending on whether they're infected or not.
What's the process for placing these children, and what happens to them once they leave the custody of the federal government?
So right now, SBCS will be vetting family members, people that the children have identified, or people that have volunteered to become sponsors, which itself is a long program where you have to be vetted by the federal government. People usually are reunited with a family or sponsor within 30 to 35 days, like the government is estimating. And from then, they're going to begin their asylum case. And that's going to take quite some time. There's a huge backlog in immigration court. Kids, again, who came during the 2014 rise in the amount of unaccompanied children and the 2018 rise in unaccompanied children, they still have their cases going on. So a lot of these people are going to be preparing for essentially the beginning of their adult life in the United States.
Max, there has been some controversy over one of the services offered to the young migrants, and that is in-person instruction that's being provided by the County Board of Education. What kind of instruction are they getting?
According to Roberto Carrillo, who's the principal at the County Office of Education, they're going to be learning about the arts, visual arts, performing arts. They want to let them learn to begin to express themselves also in written formats and give them a basic understanding of the English language. Like I said, pretty soon, a lot of these young people are going to be starting to attend school in the United States, and any leg up they could get on that opportunity would obviously be helpful for helping them integrate into the U.S.
San Diego Republican Congressman Darrell Issa released a statement criticizing that move, saying that residents of the county have been waiting to get their own kids back into school, but many still cannot do that. And he says parents have every right to be angry. What was the response by the County Board of Education?
The County Board of Education is under a responsibility to educate kids that are in the county. For a lot of kids in the county right now, until, a few weeks from now, that's entirely remote. That's not really a possibility with these children in the convention center. They don't all have tablets. So the county decided that the move would be to provide in-person learning.
And Max, you have been following the story on both sides of the border. What have you witnessed that has surprised you while covering this crisis?
Well, one thing is that it's not necessarily any different from, any other quote unquote crises at the border. These are things that have happened in the past and will continue to happen unless the United States increases its capacity for dealing with young people and other people, families arriving at the border. And it's not as if anything new is happening now. And you'll remember, even under Trump, there was a huge surge of migrants to the southwest border, really at the height of anti-immigrant rhetoric from the President of the United States.
I've been speaking with reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler, who covers border issues for KPBS. Max, thanks for your reporting, and thanks for joining me on the Roundtable.
Thanks, Maya.
Now on The Finest. In San Diego and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe has morphed in meaning and form over the past 500 years.
She can be a source of comfort. She can be a source of pain. Her power comes because she has all of these different facets to her.
Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Overt incidences of hate, even violence directed at our Asian American communities, have been on the rise since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Today, I am speaking with Lee Ann Kim, a former television news journalist and anchor. Currently, Lee Ann runs her own media production company and is a member of the San Diego Union Tribune Community Advisory Board. Kim was moved to write an opinion article for the San Diego Union Tribune when she learned that there were Americans who did not believe that race and hate motivated the mass shooting of 8 people near Atlanta, 6 of whom were women of Asian descent. Leanne, welcome, and thank you for joining me on the roundtable.
Thank you for having me.
Leanne, please, can you begin by explaining to us what was going through your mind when you heard about this tragedy, and what made you speak up and share your own personal stories?
There was a lot going on when the Atlanta massacre occurred. I mean, new numbers were just released that same day that nearly 8,500 incidents of anti-Asian hate had been reported in the past year alone. So as you can imagine, the climate already tense, already fearful. But when we heard about the Atlanta killings, there was something very specific about it that caused me to have this visceral reaction, especially to the denials that this was racially motivated, but it was a result of sexual addiction. I cried so hard, and I was having this kind of anxiety that I hadn't felt in a long time. And I realized that it was reliving decades of trauma, right? So I'm talking about not a binary kind of racism that we've been discussing about this anti-Asian hate, that it's because of being Asian, but there are multiple layers that we're now dealing with here. Asian American women who have had ubiquitous experiences of this very insidious kind of racism, not just because of our ethnicity, but it intersects with gender and misogyny and the hypersexualization that is so ingrained in our culture, but is rarely talked about. And so since this is the first time that we were talking about it as a society, it was really just, it's so full of anxiety, right? And I wanted to help make visible what has been invisible for so long. And I just was so angry that anyone would question that these killings were motivated by race. And I think it's very important to note that hate and bigotry does not preclude desire. And in fact, it legitimizes the violent expression of hate. And that's what I believe happened here.
And you have experienced racism in different ways, gosh, from an early age. And you write about an incident in elementary school in particular. Tell us that story. What happened there, and why do you think that it happened to you?
You know, I've gone through lots of experiences, both overt and covert. And of all the experiences, this one was the hardest because I'm a mother, and I was 7 years old when this happened. And at the time, I was the only student of color in my second grade class, and my teacher just didn't like me. She always complained that I talked too much, but you know, anyone who has children knows that 7-year-olds talk a lot and they do what they want to do because they're just having fun. And we also know now that even teachers have biases and unspoken expectations of children of color. Sometimes they hold us to higher standards. And in this case, she wanted to teach me a lesson that I needed to be quiet. And she did that by taping my mouth shut with masking tape. And then she announced to the whole class that she was going to make a dunce cap for my big head. And so not only did she shame me in front of my fellow students, but she emphasized that I was stupid. I was this stupid little girl, and it was so cruel. And imagine the kind of impact that has on a child for the rest of their lives. But, you know, that story, as I share it, it has a positive ending. Not just because I became an Illinois state speech champion in high school, and not just because I ended up speaking for a living, but just yesterday, I received a letter from the superintendent of schools from that district. And he not only acknowledged my trauma, but he apologized for it. And he said that he wanted to use that experience to help train other teachers. And there was something that just really helped heal that 7-year-old girl, you know? And words cannot express how much that meant to me, having that apology 43 years later. And that all came as a result of me sharing my experience. And interestingly, I cannot believe how many other people have told me that they too had their mouths taped shut. So it didn't just happen to me.
That time and setting was so long ago and so different than things are right now. How did your parents react when they heard that story?
Oh my gosh, girl, you think I told my parents, my Asian immigrant parents? I mean, they would have spanked me because, the teacher's always right. And if I had my mouth taped shut, then I must have done something so horrible in class. So I never told my parents. So it was a very lonely situation. And to this day, they don't know.
In the article, you wrote that women of Asian descent, it seems, are often expected to behave a certain way, just as you said, or look or dress a certain way. What are those expectations? Explain them to us.
Well, they're deeply ingrained. I think anyone could name all the qualities that they think an Asian woman has, right? That we're quiet, we're sweet, we're soft, we're obedient, we're subservient, we're compliant. Don't rock the boat. We serve to please others, and through colonization and pop culture, we've also been subjected to stereotypes of being hypersexual. You add that all together and you see how the culmination of those expectations can add up to the dehumanization, the objectification, and seeing us as disposable, which is exactly what happened in Atlanta. We tempt you so you can kill us so that you can live with a clear conscience.
And you write that when you became a journalist, your mother said that you were no longer her daughter, but the daughter of the Asian American community. Tell us what she meant by that exactly.
It's funny because it's a very Asian thing to say, right? So there's that whole idea of saving face. And I think what she meant was, listen, girl, don't mess it up, because what you say and what you do doesn't just reflect Leanne Kim. It reflects on anyone who looks like you. And you know what? She was absolutely right, unfortunately, that sometimes when there are few of us in certain positions, we do end up people do end up seeing everyone else that looks like us. So I think that's what she was meaning. And it put a lot of pressure on me to go above and beyond.
And you even explained in your opinion piece that you were mistaken for another journalist of Asian descent.
All the time. I mean, ask any Asian American woman here in town. I mean, I was always asked whether I was Connie Chung, Gina Liu, Denise Imada, Phoebe Chung Chua, Mai Nishikawa, Kyung La, the whole list goes on. We're just one big Chinese person, versus as seen as individual. And come on, I mean, Connie Chung was at that time almost 30 years my senior. Anyone who asked me, I even remember holding a microphone, on the street somewhere, and someone asked me if I was Christy Yamaguchi, an ice skater. I mean, you just have to laugh about that, right? But it tells a bigger story.
You've had a long career. You were in Houston and Missouri, and you experienced a lot of challenging times in your career during that time. And then you came to San Diego, which is home to significant Asian American Pacific Islander communities. But there wasn't that much difference from Houston or Springfield. You were dismissed, you were objectified, and you write that you regret that you never said anything. What were your experiences, and why do you think that you remained silent, almost like you still had that tape on your mouth?
So I will say that every market, it was very different. I mean, Houston, there was a very large Asian population. Springfield, it was literally 99% white. So, I mean, seriously, there wasn't a week that passed that people had their jaws open when they saw me speaking in perfect English, And San Diego, I mean, hey, we're next to the border. You hablo español. I felt really good. Korean restaurants, Vietnamese restaurants abound. And I will say, first and foremost, that my experience here overall was very positive. Working in the news business here was a privilege. I worked with some of the best people who treated me with respect and dignity. But I also worked during an era in an environment where you danced around issues of race. Why was it that the main weekday anchors across the San Diego market were white? And you turn on the TV on the weekends, and many of the anchors were people of color. We called it the back of the broadcast bus, And, we had to pick our battles, when to raise our voice. I mean, you can't fight everything, but I did fight when it was egregious, like the idea of doing a series of reports called Sex Secrets of the Orient, a series that they assigned to a white male reporter when there were 4 Asian American women working in the newsroom. That was wrong. None of us were consulted. And again, this here is another case proving that we were invisible. And it wasn't until, quite frankly, I threatened to quit that they really took a look at it and said, okay, we're going to drop it. And they can thank me today, because can you imagine if they moved forward with something like that, what kind of, feedback they would have had on a national level?
Okay, but now let's look back, Leanne. Do you think that times have changed significantly to the point that you will not keep quiet anymore?
Yeah, well, yes, of course, things have changed. I mean, there are more women in management. There are more people of color in management. And quite frankly, the culture of newsrooms have changed dramatically. I still have friends who work at my old stomping grounds, and they say that the environment has changed. They do anti-bias training. Things like this are not tolerated. They have a female news director and a Black GM, and sometimes you have to make change happen yourself. So after I left Channel 10, I started the San Diego Asian Film Festival, a place where I felt safe, a place where we are telling true, authentic stories of the Asian diaspora. We were hand in hand with other efforts across the nation by other communities of color that paved the way for us to demand justice. I do think that things are changing. And, now that the landscape is different, that in and of itself has given us the space to speak our truth and reveal our pain in hope that we could affect change.
And speaking of affecting change, you mentioned how the superintendent of your school district called you apologizing. What else has been the reaction to this piece?
Wow. There's been a lot of anger, a lot of people who feel sorry for me. And I do not want anyone to feel sorry for me, because these experiences are just some. I've had much more joy than pain. But what's interesting is so many people who tell me like, oh, wow, you're so courageous, or you're so brave. And I am none of those things. I shared these stories because it had to be done. It is our time. And I think that given the stage that we have right now and this opportunity to bring to light these stories that tell a pattern, an undeniable pattern that needs to be stopped, we first have to address what is the problem and define it and put words to it. And so I feel as though that's happening as a result of these great conversations that we're having, not just by me, but by many others who say, oh my God, Leanne, that triggered all these other memories that I buried. Well, let's bring that to light. Let's not live under shame and guilt or in the shadows anymore. Let's collectively, en masse, raise our voices to prove that this is happening.
And Leanne, it seems like it really is coming to light, because the Union Tribune received 12 voluntary op-ed submissions for the Community Voices Project, and they're publishing all of them, including one that your husband wrote. How does that make you feel? What does that mean to you?
Wow. Well, it means a lot for someone who used to work in the news business. It means a lot. It means that we are living in unprecedented times, and that requires unprecedented action. And I'll tell you something, and I hope nobody takes this as a generalization, but I've been around a lot of Asian people, and we tend to keep our opinions to ourselves for many reasons, right? Part of it is Confucianism. Part of it is also the invisibility, the model minority myth, all of that stuff. For us to write an op-ed you have no idea. It takes so much for an Asian American to, unsolicited, write an op-ed. For them to receive this many, that means something big has happened. We are at a tipping point. It has triggered something so deep that we need to get it out. And the fact that the UT has responded in this way gives me hope. The fact that I'm having this conversation with you at KPBS gives me hope. And here's what I've told many people over the years privately, is that after I left the news business and I was running the film festival, and even after I left the public sector, in being a nonprofit leader and just going off on my own, I ripped that tape off. The tape is off now because I am untethered to a news agency, and I can now speak my truth, right? Before, other agencies owned me. Do you know what I'm saying? I spoke on their behalf. Yeah. I am now this free balloon, just kind of hanging out there, going with the wind. And I just feel this was very invigorating.
Well, I hope that we can talk to you again. I'm so glad that we connected and that you were available and so authentic and open to explain to us what you went through.
Thank you, Maya. I really appreciate it. And I hope the audience understands. But hey, all we can do is present.
Exactly. I've been speaking with Leanne Kim, San Diego journalist and former news anchor. Leanne, thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really good. And I hope that we can continue this conversation.
That wraps up this week's edition of the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guests, KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler and former broadcast journalist Leanne Kim. If you missed any part of our show, you can listen anytime on the KPBS Roundtable podcast. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Thanks for listening, and join us next week on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.